Our next menu item is the game object. Inside the game object, we have a create empty. Now the create empty is a very special kind of object that we can create. We're going to go ahead and create one. When we do, inside of our scene view, we can see that we've got just an empty object. It just has a transform gizmo right now. If I left click to the side of it, I actually deselect it, and I can't really select it again. That's because it's just a point in space. It's not an actual selectable object. Now in the hierarchy, where our objects inside of our scene view are, I can select back on that game object that got created. Now we can see that this object really is just a point in space. It is a container. This is a very important object inside of Unity because it allows us to create anything from it. We can take this game object and turn it into an audio type. We can turn it into a character or a weapon or a trigger type system. Whatever it is we want to turn it into, we have this object to do just that. Now, before we get more in depth on that one, I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. And we're going to look at some game objects that actually have things already assigned to them so that we can see that these objects, by applying properties to them, by applying components and assets to them, they can become something. So we'll start off with just our particle system. Let's go ahead and zoom in, F on the keyboard. We can see in here we have a basic particle system. We've got a lot of properties inside of our inspector that we can adjust, from the min and max size, how much these particles, how big they get, how fast they go, how long they last. A lot of good options in here, and we'll break that out to a separate topic as it has a lot of elements inside of it. Let's go ahead and hit delete on that one. Additional items inside of here, we have a camera. You can see that we can create a camera. We already have one camera in the scene by default, but you can create additional cameras. So if you were trying to switch from one camera view to another, you could have multiple cameras inside of the scene. We have GUI text, GUI texture, and 3D text. These items are used to create text inside of the viewport. I'll go ahead and put the 3D text so that we can see what a 3D text is. So here we can see a 3D text inside the scene. Again, inside of our inspector where all of our properties are, we can see that we've got options in here. Type in our words, have them come up here and use them, change out your font types and things like that. Additional ones, we have point light, spotlight, and directional light, the type of lights that we can use. We have our point light, which is like an omni light if you're used to 3D Studio Max's terms, and the properties in here. And we'll be looking at the lights individually as we actually light a room later on. And then we have our spotlights, which is just as it says, the spotlight. We're able to change up the radius and the fall off. Our additional lights are going to be our directional lights. The directional lights have parallel rays, so these are really good ones to use when you're trying to light up an environment, something large inside of a scene. The next thing we have are our basic primitives. We've got our cube, our sphere, our capsule, our cylinder, and our plane. Each one of these are good to use. They allow us an opportunity to do some basic testing without actually having to bring in assets into the environment. We can just use some primitives to mock up the scene and the world. Additional ones are like with cloth. We can create interactive cloth objects and have them dynamically interact with the world. We'll take a look at those as we go. Our audio reverb zone, we can create a reverb zone to use, just an area location for that effect. We have options for our tree, our ragdoll, and our wind zone. The wind zone creates wind zones where it's going to be blowing. The ragdoll effect is a wizard, which allows us to actually bring in, for instance, a biped from 3D Studio Max and very quickly assign the different bones needed for the ragdoll, and it just creates that basic ragdoll character for you. Nice and simple. And take a peek at the tree. One of the new features inside of Unity 3, you can go in, create a brand new tree, and we'll take a closer look at this a little bit later on its own individual video. Now these are game objects. These are basic objects that you can create inside of Unity just with a click. Now you'll notice though that when we create something, let's say for instance a cube. When we look at this cube, we've got a couple of extra little drop downs over here in the inspector. And these are called components. These are things that are added to this empty game object to create something with it, to turn it into something more than just a point in space. Here we can see that we've got a cube mesh filter, we've got a box collider, we've got a mesh renderer, and for instance, let's say the mesh renderer, let's say we uncheck that. We can see that all of a sudden our object doesn't render. So this is something that makes it visible for us to display inside of our scene view. So let's continue on down. We've got other options in here. We've got things like center on children. And let's just go ahead and do a couple things in here. Let's make another cube. Let's move it to the side. Let's create a parent-child relationship. So if we go back up into our game object, we see things like make parent, clear parent, apply changes to prefab. So let's do this. Let's select on two objects. Let's go game object. Let's say make parent. When I do that, it's automatically making the object a parent of the other object. Say I want to center on children. If I click center on children, it's going to center on the child object and move that parent to the child object's position. Just a good way of working with the objects, and you may need to do that. Clear parent allows us to clear the parent so that they're two individual objects again. And apply changes to prefab if we've made changes to a prefab. And we'll see that more in depth when we get into the prefabs. Now the other three options down here, these are really useful when you're working inside of the editor. You're moving objects around, you're trying to get just the right camera angle. Those options are going to help us with that. So let's say we go in here. We're going to go into our game object. We're going to say move to view. So if I say move to view, if I've got an object selected, I want to move it to my view. I can select on the object, I say move to view, and it's going to move that object to the center of my viewport right in here on my scene view. So it's a great way of moving objects across a long location. Instead of trying to drag it and drag it, you can simply just say move to view. Now the other one we have is align with view. So let's say we want to align this with the view that we have. So I'm going to align that with my view. I'll say align with view. You'll notice it aligned it with the view. Now where is it? It's right on us. If we zoom out, we can see it aligned it with the rotation and the position of where I was at. Now it may not be that great for, let's say, a cube, but let's say for instance I'm trying to get the right camera angle. I zoom in on my object, I select on my camera, I go to my game object, I say align with view, and all of a sudden it frames the camera with the angle of where I'm at. So that way my camera is set up just right with my view. Instead of trying to manipulate that camera to get the right angle, I just use the scene view to get that started. If we back out a little bit, we can see that the camera has moved. And the last one we have is align view to selected. So if I select this object and I want to align my view to that object, it moves my camera down into that position and gets me nice and set up. A couple of great little options for working inside of your workspace and moving objects around, especially moving your camera around. It really works really well for that. And that's going to do it for our game object menu. We're going to see a lot of additional videos on all of these types as they each require a substantial amount of time to go over all the properties and the parameters to make those effective. And we'll be doing that just in a little bit.